Now, there are some reasons which we want to discuss that whenever there's a change in the price for a good, will it cause a big change in quantity or small? So let's go over these some reasons. Reason number one says proportion of income spent on the good. For example, let's suppose your monthly expense towards restaurants like Roasters versus Red Apple. I hope you're aware of these ones. Red Apple is like a cheap restaurant, and Roaster takes relatively a higher proportion of your income. Red Apple takes a smaller proportion of your income. So let's say dono ki prices increases by 10%. So the question is, which one's going to have a bigger impact on quantity fall and which one's going to have a smaller impact on the quantity fall? Because if you think about your expenditure pattern, you're just thinking Red Apple 100 रुपए का रोल है, if it even increases by 10%, 110 का हो जाएगा. From my income's perspective, from my monthly expense, 10 रुपया does not make much of a difference. But Roasters, on the other hand, takes about 1,000 rupees for every time you go there and spend. And 10% means 100 rupees. Now, 100 rupees is way bigger than just 10 rupees. So, we say that if something takes a smaller or a lower proportion of your income, you don't have a big impact on the quantity for it. You'll continue to consume it. So, that means the word we're going to use for it is inelastic. Now, I haven't mentioned these words earlier, so let me go back to my diagrams over here to bring these words into perspective. Now, whenever you have a large shift in quantity, we say they are elastic because consumers will show a big response. Elastic means a bigger change can happen. The way I remember this in university was elastic is like a rubber band. You can stretch it much. So if there is a much stretch in the quantity, they are elastic. If there is a smaller stretch in the quantity, it is inelastic because inelastic means you can't change by much. That's how I remembered in university, and it stuck with me in my head for a longer duration. So, on that note, if something takes a small proportion of your income, your demand will change by little amount. It's sort of like, everyone's house probably newspaper comes, and newspaper is relatively very cheap. From your monthly expense, it probably will take like what, 300, 400 rupees, and you're spending on a monthly expense about 2 lakh rupees. That 300 rupees has not much of an impact. Okay, so the quantity is not going to change by much if the price changes. On the other hand, maybe your expense towards entertainment is much bigger. And if the price changes by 10%, it's going to have a much bigger impact on your overall monthly expenditure. You're going to show a bigger response in that case. Number two is about the number of substitute a good has. If something like Coke and Pepsi, I've seen this happen with my friends so often. They say we want Coke. The restaurant waiter says we don't have Coke. They say Pepsi le aao. That is a very close substitute. Okay. So now when things are substitute, people can easily switch. So if you increase your price, consumers will immediately switch, and the change in quantity demanded is going to be large. Therefore, more number of substitutes will cause the demand to be elastic. Usually, I've seen people, they're very brand loyal to certain goods. Like I've seen with Apple, a lot of people who use Apple, they're very brand loyal to them. And so we'll say it's a very strong brand. And if Apple increases the price, we will not see people moving away from it too much. For many people, the affordability is going to have an impact. A little drop is possible, and so it is inelastic. Now, as far as the point number 4 goes, the level of necessity or addiction, honestly, you can take them as two different points. These could be a point number 4 and point number 5. You can write it separately. Necessity and addiction are two different things, but they have a similar impact. When something is a necessity, even if its prices goes up, the change in quantity demanded is not going to be much. Okay, similarly, even with the habitual addictive product, it's the same thing. If price goes up, the consumers are not going to switch away from it to quite a degree. Usually, with addictive products, we could say that addictive products here and there you can have a discussion about cigarettes. I think even internet in today's day and age, Facebook, Instagram, they're all addictive products. Necessity and then we can talk about like the basic necessities like milk and sugar and fuel and stuff like that. So these can be your two different points, but they have the same impact. What we see is with point number 5, number of uses for a product or number of uses is basically linked with the number of features something has. If I want to make something more more important for somebody, I have to add on to the features to it. The more features it has, the more addictive, the more useful the product becomes. And so if something has a lot of uses, the demand will be inelastic, and if something has fewer uses, it tends to be elastic. Like watches in today's day and age, watch is like what, 2 function 3 function device. It can tell you the time and the date maximum. The old ones, but now the new Apple ones have more functionality, so they can be more inelastic comparatively. Lastly, the time duration that you have. Now if a price of something goes up, are we talking immediately in the short run, or are we talking about in the long run? Usually, in the short run, people do not have a choice and they have to consume the product. But in the long run, they can move away from it. For example, we have solar panels nowadays, and then you have normal Karachi electricity or power generation, fuel-based electricity generators. So if the price of fuel goes up, in the short run, consumers cannot switch towards the solar panels immediately. So in the short run, people will continue to consume the fuel-based generation. But in the long run, they can actually switch. So in the short run, if you have less time, inelastic. In the long run, you can find alternatives to it. Even cigarette works this way. In the short run, you are addicted to it. It's a habitual good, but in the long run, you can change your habits. It's a long-term situation. So these factors that affect elasticity, number one, you need to know them exactly by these headings that I've mentioned, along with what is going to make them elastic and what scenario is going to make them inelastic. For example, if the question is, what are the factors that can make a product inelastic? What are the factors that can make a product inelastic? The question already has a direction. You want to talk about the inelasticity of it. So if you give me an answer that one of the factors is the proportion of income spent, that's great. But you're not really answering my question. You're not telling me how this factor can be elastic or inelastic. If you tell me that if it takes a large proportion of the income, it is elastic, unfortunately, I can't give you a mark because my question has a direction. Inelastic ka reason batao. So if you tell me that one of the feature is the proportion of income spent, and if it takes a lower proportion of your income, it will be inelastic, I'll give you 2 marks for that because you have answered my question. If the question is, tell us the features that makes a product elastic or inelastic, dono hai, open-ended hai, then I can say one of the feature is the proportion of income spent. I get 1 mark for it. If it takes a large proportion, it's elastic. If it takes a small proportion of income, it's inelastic. I get my 2 marks because it was an open ended and I gave both sides. A lot of times we see that kids are able to tell us the factor, but they're not able to apply it. Elastic and elastic say. So you have to learn this, at least 3 4 factors, and you should be able to answer them.